The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. Chapter 6, Part 4. As I have already explained in attempting to converse with the slow movers, I was confronted with a twofold difficulty. In the first place, though I might burst with impatience, yet must I preserve a perfectly calm and placid exterior. And in the second place, when after the long and wearying delay, it came my turn to make reply, that reply must not exceed the snail's pace of the slow mover's speech, else their bright eyes clouded up, and they seemed absolutely paralyzed by the rapidity of my utterance. Their eyelids sank slowly down, and they seemed to fall into a deep slumber, out of which it took hours to arouse them. At the first streak of dawn, I sought out the aged slow mover whom I had often noted in his leafy temple, seated on a marble pediment, his eyes fixed on the silent stream which bathed the very roots of the trees, whose wide spreading branches helped to roof over his habitation. All that day and the starry night which followed it, I sat at his feet. Picture yourself my utter despair at learning that not a word or a line, not a leaf or a parchment was in existence which might end my fearful anxiety. I say fearful, for stronger and stronger, hour by hour, grew the impulse to put an end to this life of useless, senseless activity and join the throng of living statues, into whose heart no vain regrets came to darken their placid dream life. On the morning of the second day, a thought burst upon my mind. It was this: perchance there may dwell somewhere on this isle some one living creature who, unlike his brothers, may possess the power of rapid speech, whose tongue, for some reason or other, may have stayed loosened. I reasoned thus: in every land there were opposites, good and bad, beautiful and ugly, graceful and awkward, swift and slow. Surely on this isle must live such contrasts as these. True, it may be an exception, but it would be most wonderful if it did not exist. All that day I spent in imparting unto the aged slow mover my train of thought. It was deep in the twilight ere I had succeeded in putting the question to him, whether there was not some living creature dwelling on this island whose powers of speech were more like mine, and to whom I might, in my ever increasing dread of transformation into a slow mover, flee for refuge from myself, for satisfaction of the irresistible longing pressing on my very soul. But the shades of evening were not so deep that I could not note the darker shadow which began to gather on the face of the aged slow mover when I had completed my question. I was startled. So violent were the beatings of my heart that they sounded loud and muffled above the sighing of the zephyr, the rustle of the leaves, the plaintive warbling of the nightingale. As this shadow went on growing ever deeper and deeper on the old man's visage, I felt that I had touched some ancient wound, which, though long forgotten, now bled afresh. His lips parted, his head sank slowly, slowly. A sigh came forth, so full of meaning, so like a tale-bearer of some long hidden sorrow, that I feared for the worst. My limbs stiffened. I could feel the blood lessen its pace in my veins and go groping along as if uncertain of its way. I pressed the tips of my fingers to my cheeks. They were cold as polished marble. I essayed to speak. The words would not come. At last, I made a violent effort. "Bulger!" I whispered. Poor dog, he slept at my feet. I struggled to escape the spell for one brief moment that I might stoop to give my faithful friend a farewell caress. Hist! The slow mover spoke. Son! I was saved. He had aught to say to me. The spell was broken. My heart began to beat again. The warm blood ran tingling through my veins. It was a narrow escape. Already my fingertips had cooled. Another moment, and I would have joined the throng of slow movers and become a brother to the marble dwellers on the sculptor's isle. All that night, the aged slow mover talked to me, and when the sun went up, I knew all. I knew the secret which had so darkened his placid countenance. I knew the cave in which dwelt the hermit of the sculptor's isle, an outcast, a prisoner, shut in between the narrow walls of a cavern by the sea for no fault of his, for no sin, for no wrong. Nature had so willed it. Why the aged slow mover knew not. Antonius was the name which the hermit bore. When morning came, I sought him out. I found him seated by his cavern's portal, looking out upon the glory of the eastern sky. This was the secret of his exile. Some cruel fate had, in his youth, visited him with a dread disease, not unlike that which is known as St. Vitus's dance. When the fit was upon him, not only did he lose all control of his limbs, so that his feet bore him whither he willed not to go, and that too with extreme rapidity, but his arms likewise executed the most rapid and vigorous gestures, now in apparent anger, now entreaty, now wonder. You will readily understand why ill-fated Antonius came to be banished from the midst of the slow movers. Although their brother and deeply beloved of them, his lightning-like rapidity of motion, his violent gestures, his almost ceaseless change of attitude not only offended the slow movers, it dazed them, it shocked them. It checked the sluggish flow of lifeblood within their veins and threatened them all with slow but certain death. He must go. He did. Antonius was banished to the cavern by the sea, where never came sound save the ocean's roar when lashed by the demons of the gale, or its sad murmur and ceaseless break and splash in its moments of slumber and rest. But most terrible of all the manifestations of the unfortunate Antonius's fearful ailment was the utterly wild and ungovernable rapidity of his speech. Like maddened steeds, tongue and lips rushed along. To the eyes and ears of the slow movers, such a violently expressive face, such mad rapidity of utterance, were death itself. Not one brief month would have found a living statue in that home of flinty hearts had Antonius not gone. Antonius was thankful for that dread decree which housed him forever in the cavern by the sea. He saw the sufferings of his people, and though his eyes in that brief time wept more tears than all his brethren ever had shed in their sluggish lives, yet were they but a poor proof of the awful grief he felt. Antonius turned toward me as I approached the spot where he sat wrapped in deep meditation. A sad, but withal kindly smile flitted about his lips, like the quick but faint glimmer of the lightning in the distant sky. He rose. I paused to await his bidding to approach him. He spake not a word, but stretched out his hand. I bounded forward to clasp it and press it to my lips. At that instant, the fit fell on him. I could see the look of pain which flashed across his face. Away he glided, now backward, now forward, now sideways, now obliquely, his hand outstretched in a desperate effort to reach me, who, with equal desperation, advanced and retreated in a mad endeavor to grasp what constantly eluded me. Bulger, utterly unable to comprehend this wild dance among the rocks of that cavernous shore, followed my heels, barking furiously. I could take no time to quiet him. Away, away, sped Antonius with redoubled speed, his right hand extended toward me as if with pitiful prayer to grasp it, and thus end the fit which was shaking his limbs so furiously. Pausing to catch my breath, I again pursued the flitting figure with determination to overtake it or perish in the attempt. At last it seemed to circle in smaller and ever smaller rings. Now was my time. I sprang upon that whirling form with a sort of mad desperation to seize and hold its outstretched hand. At length I held it, but no! His body had come to a rest, but now high over his head, now at my feet, now flashing up one side, now down the other, now whizzing in front of my eyes, now encircling my head like a bird in swift flight, that hand went on, ever on, in its wild and mysterious course. My strength was failing me. Shall I ever be able to grasp it? Antonius, too, showed signs of yielding to the awful power of the dread disease which tormented him. His face took on a strange pallor. His breast heaved convulsively. With one last despairing effort, I succeeded in catching his hand in its flight around my head. I clung to it with desperate vigor. My touch dispelled the venom from his veins. He seemed to awake as from some awful dream. He passed his hand across his eyes. He smiled. Still clinging to his hand, I gently forced him to be seated upon a rocky bench over which the ocean had woven a velvety cover of seagrass and weeds. Antonius, I cried, peace come upon thee. Forget thy suffering. Be as thou once wert. My touch can give thee rest, at least for a brief respite. He pressed my hand. A deep sigh lifted his breast. It was the last gasp of the demon which oppressed him. He was now at rest. To me, his utterance was rapid, but not more so than that of many quick thinkers with whom I had conversed. What wouldst thou? Said he, in a low but strangely sweet, mild voice. I unfolded to him the object of my coming. I went back to the finding of the Roman newspaper and my departure from home. All, I told him, all. How I had come into the home of the slow movers, how I had mistaken them for marble like the rest of the figures above the island, how I longed to have the mystery cleared up. All that day Antonius and I sat by the sea in most delightful converse. Only once at high noon did he set a brief limit to his tale while we passed into his cavern to partake of food and drink. With high bounding heart, I listened to his story of the landing of the 7 sculptors upon the isle. Their first task had been to rear the glorious temple with its long flight of marble steps leading down to the sea. Then they, and later their sons and their sons' sons, had set to work to people this beautiful island with almost countless figures of the rarest grace and finish. In the forests, by the river's banks, through the valley, on the hillside, adown the terraces, to the very water's edge, rose the faultless statues in wondrous beauty and profusion. Here, there, and everywhere, forms of matchless grace gleamed snow white amid the leafy bowers or tangled underwood. A mysterious ardor burned within the hearts of these exiled artists. It would seem that theirs was a wild sort of hope to rear on the far distant isle another Rome, an infant daughter, but fairer and whiter in her marble magnificence than the glorious mother who sate upon her 7 hills. Times and times again, aye, thrice 70, the wretched Paula arose out of the quarried blocks, ever fair and ever fairer, now bent in awful grief, now putting the very skies to shame with the entrancing beauty of her upturned, pleading, sweet, and pitiful face. Here and there, too, stood great Caesar, never to be forgotten for his godlike clemency in snatching the sculptors from terrible death. As the 2nd century of the exile dawned upon the little Roman kingdom, far away beneath the southern skies, at the very moment when the colony was waxing strong and vigorous, a strange and mysterious thing happened to the dwellers of this island home of sweet content. No more male children were born. The 7 sculptors, now bent with age and their faces hollowed by the sharp chisels of remorse, went one after the other to the dark realm of death. Their sons, too, came into ripe manhood, and their sons grew up happy in the procession of that glorious talent which had peopled the isle with such matchless forms of beauty. But now the race had reached the end of its long reign in the world of art. Decade after decade slipped away, and still there came not one male child to gladden the sculptor's home. A sort of blank despair sank upon the colony. The elder sculptors laid their chisels down in utter hopelessness. Even the younger wrought less and less. Still, there came no boy to wake the old-time song and laughter of that once joyous island home. Fingers, cunning in art, grew stiff with age. And I think we're going to pause here and we'll finish this chapter in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I love you. Thanks for watching. And as Tigger says, ta-ta for now.